Hey everyone, this is Tom, and this week's character is Grashnak for Paul. Grashnak is he's kind of a complicated character as far as what he is. He's a half-orc who got cursed with some draconian spell, and so he's a bit in transition between becoming something more dragon-like and something kind of half-orcish. I don't know how far along in the transition he is, or if he's going to go full dragon, or just be some sort of weird gargoyle type monstrosity. But as far as that goes, it was still a fun change of pace. So tried out something slightly different with the format for this one, where I did all the notes at the beginning before hitting record. I think it's just a good use of time. Showing the writing down of the notes is sort of probably something that's probably pretty skippable, and it does kind of take too long for how simple it is. So I think that might be something I'll do in the past. I definitely still have a bad habit of forgetting to hit record, and I miss out certain chunks. Even on this one, there's about an hour in total, I think. Maybe a half hour. Not too badly. Yeah, probably closer to about a half hour that I missed just because I stop recording and I go up and get coffee or go to the bathroom or something, and I just forget to hit it. But I'll probably get over it by the time we're all done. So as far as this one goes, being something reptilian, or he's on the way to being something reptilian, rather than just being like some of the source images that Paul sent me was where he gave me about 4 or 5 drawings that I think he did of Grashnak, and he looks very much like sort of the character Goliath from Gargoyles. Just this large, broad, almost like wrestler body type sort of figure. But I thought with having him be something more becoming draconic directly, I think the hybridization between those two sort of species would be neat to have them be a little bit more distinct from just a humanoid with weird feet or bat wings. So it's really subtle and basic, but I did just basically I gave his torso a bit of a longer kind of tube to it, even though it doesn't really show up too predominantly in the final, but I just wanted it to be a little bit longer, sort of like a Komodo dragon, and then play around with like even the shape of the fibia and tibia down here on the lower leg, as well as giving him some of the more of that reptilian feet, but definitely something a bit more Komodo dragon-y than I normally would do, like something like a T-Rex or a Velociraptor. Well, maybe not. They have really distinct feet, but like just that sort of general sauropod. Is that sauropod? Terra? I can't remember. Either way, which one? But yeah, like sort of like the T-Rex type dinosaur. That's sort of more for like a bipedal creature in particular, something kind of ostrichy. But I think if he's turning into something like a dragon, I think dragons they're quadrupedal, even though they have 6 wing limbs, including the wings. But with having him going towards that more of a creature, it would be less of a T-Rex foot and more like a quadruped foot, like an alligator or a Komodo dragon. But I think Komodo dragons have a bit more interesting feet. Crocodiles and alligators they've got floppier, pointier, sort of ploppier kind of limbs because they do so much swimming. So their hands they don't need to be as solidly built as a Komodo dragon. So I thought that was a good source of inspiration for those guys. The one thing that was great about looking at the Komodo dragon skeletons is noticing they've got a very strange kind of clavicle like girdle and sternum around the front of their chest, and they've got an extremely wide sternum that's almost like a bone plate of armor. And I wanted to include that so there'd be sort of like a flat bony section of the chest that doesn't have like this typical human pectorals. At least that was my idea from the get-go. But then thinking about having like a humanoid that has large wings. I mean, I've mentioned it before, but in order for a humanoid or something the size of a human to fly and take off like this, like sort of with like these like angelic style wings coming out the back, they would need a sternum that sticks out about 6 feet. So I thought with this new kind of large breastplate it sort of gave me at least some wiggle room to play with some anatomy. So I sort of made it like a double-decker sternum where it's got like the main sort of big bone plate, but then above that would be like a raised sort of keel for like for the pec. So it's basically like a double duty sternum for two sets of pectorals for flapping. So the smaller one, which is basically directly human proportion, that would be for the pectorals for the arms, and then trying to come up with some biological justification for the larger wings. Those would then connect down to the larger, wider sternum down that sort of like covers the whole sort of main thing. I still would love to one day just finally just resolve, like just do a really in-depth, it would take a long time, a lot of research, but really in-depth means of incorporating wings onto something with 4 arms or 4 limbs already. You can't just stick them on. You got to have them mounted appropriately, especially if you're going to be drawing them from any sort of angle other than the front. Maybe it's just me, but it always just drives me nuts when I just see like wings just kind of popping out of the back, or if they're all put in and there's some sort of lumpy noise that looks like muscle. Sometimes it just doesn't, or most of the time it just doesn't work for me. So I like to have it look at least somewhat biologically feasible. And even just any sort of indication, I think, does the trick. I'm happy just to see that. I think when it's just thrown on, it's just not good enough. And then, of course, I love when I do large wings like this, even for reptilian bats. I love doing sort of more like a bat wing with fingers and just deliberately doing that rather than any sort of other kind. I think it's mostly because, I mean, dragons don't typically have feathers. I don't think I've ever seen a feathered dragon. And the only thing that I know of that has like direct takeoff flight and maneuvering abilities with flying, and they're not just gliding animals. It's the mammals. It's the bats. Even things like pteranodons and like or pterosaurs and pterodactyls, they were gliding animals. I'm sure that some species of them, probably the smaller ones, could like take off from the land or take off from ground, like just standing, or like do a run and a hop and jump off. But for the most part, from what I know, they were more like cliff-dwelling animals that would just sort of jump off and soar and glide. And so that's sort of more like an example of a reptilian wing. I don't know if I can't think right now of any reptilian wings that can actually take off. So without doing anything with feathers, which would be very good to experiment with in the future, I think the large wide membranes of a bat type wing work really well. It doesn't just look good on heavy metal album covers. It's actually a pretty good way to go about doing things. So even though I do eventually cover up the muscular system, like the pecs, with the sword that comes in later, it is nice to have at least some indication there for how weird it's going to look. I've been doing lots and lots of studies lately in my sketchbook. Basically, my sketchbook is only, if somebody watched me drawing in it on the bus, they'd probably think I was like a serial killer, just because it's all skeletons and muscular systems and diagrams, and they probably think I'm making this weird catalog of human body parts or something. But for the most part, that's basically the only stuff that I sketched. An occasional dwarf head here and there, maybe an axe handle or something. But I've been particularly enamored with the muscles around the shoulder blades and the latissimus dorsi, those big ones that flare out on the sides, and finally tackling those. It's some advice that I've given much of the time, or to many people, is when you come up against something that you are not good at drawing, that means that's what you need to be drawing a lot of next. And I'm finally taking my own advice and just working on that sort of things. Like, you just look at the back and it just looks like a nightmare, but when you start breaking it down and you watch maybe some good YouTube videos explaining it and just breaking down exactly what it's going on, it makes it a lot less much less intimidating and a lot more accessible and fun. And that's one thing I've been doing a lot lately. Same with facial muscles. Once you start drawing facial muscles, you'll start drawing better faces, simpler shapes. Even though it looks really complicated, it breaks down the face into really easier chunks, and you get more. I'm starting to notice my faces are getting a bit more better, at least to me. They're more fun to draw, and the expressions are better. Having a better ground, like foundation on, a grasp on what sort of expressions are possible and why they are the way they are, and it's worth spending even at least one afternoon or one day just doing some diagrams, looking up like medical diagrams and reference photos and like looking at like really gaunt people's faces, getting photos, just taking the time to just stop and breathe for a minute and just do the research and put the work in is it's always worth the time. It's always worth it. I think the muscle stage is starting to become my favorite one. I like the bones. The bones are okay. It'd be nice to get some more, maybe some shorthand stuff. Experiment with some quicker ones just to see. That might be a worthwhile sort of experiment. Is just really simplified stuff and seeing sort of how I can speed up the process. Although I do like having like as much of a robust sort of muscular system as I can get. It would be cool to try out just simplifying things, although it is really as simple as I can think to make it. So one of the things that was good about Paul's character is that he sent me a very long, very in-depth backstory and history of the character of Grashnak. I think it's about, it's 2.5 pages, or is that? Yeah, 2.5 pages of a good adventure. So I'm going to go through that. Actually, I'm going to go through that in a bit once I start getting into the rendery stuff, just because of how we know how rendery stuff goes. What else to say about this part? One of the things too is the design. A lot of the illustrations that Paul sent along with his descriptions, with all those drawings, they all had a very similar outfit. It was a purple loincloth with a metallic belt, and it was very simple, very very bare bones sort of outfit. And the fact that it was so consistent across the board, I decided to stick very loyal to it. I think it works. It's fine, and I think he's definitely going for something. The loincloth itself, if I remember correctly, is actually tied to the transformation process and sort of like some sort of dark magics going on there. So as far as that goes, the costume is just 1-to-1 per his existing character. So because it was a bit more of a simple outfit, I wanted to put in some more time into the pose and just something with a bit more flow. Almost like you could say it's a compensation. It's not that it's a boring character, but with that amount of time, like the clothing really does seem to take the longest. It would be great if it was all just everybody's character was just naked. His clothing is just it always seems like you get one thing done, or like you feel like you got everything done, and then you remember that there's actually another belt and another sword and another bag with potions spilling out of it or something like that. But I felt that with this case, it would be nice to put in some extra time just with the anatomy and also trying to work on some sort of flowing pose that should be quite satisfying. It's good practice. I think the poses are really starting to get more dynamic as we go, which I'm looking forward to. We're not even halfway through them all. And thankfully, because I'm getting other people to tell me what I should be drawing with their characters, I don't have to sit here and try to think of anything, which is fantastic. It's awesome. It's one of the reasons I'm doing this is just growing up, you always ask your friends or your siblings or whoever's near you, just saying, like, what should I draw? And they say whatever you want, and you say that's the worst answer to that question. But then this way, if I ever want to know what to draw, somebody's told me. I just every Monday I ask, what should I draw? And every Tuesday I pick by random selection who gets to tell me what to draw that week. And that is great. If I was just leaving this up to myself and just trying to draw a character a week, they would all start looking the same. They would all start feeling really samey and boring, and I'd feel no obligation to get it done because it would just be for myself. But It's one of the best things about having everybody kind of help out with their lottery interact, or what's the word I'm looking for? Participation. It's having knowing that there's a bunch of people waiting to see what happens next. That's a really good motivator. Otherwise, especially during these summer months, it's very tempting to just go outside and sit down under a tree somewhere for a while. And hopefully, I'll get some more time to do that. But this is going really good so far. So the face, for a while, I wasn't sure what to do with it. I have drawn an orc character once so far, and I was wondering about how to keep things pretty similar to that. I didn't end up going and looking back at Davor and seeing how I had done it. I didn't care for the consistency or like keeping it there. I just sort of wanted to make something bestial and nasty, and even initially, just it's not too much like a half orc. Just knowing that it's going to be something monstrous and distinct. So. Just started off with just blunt force, just cramming in sort of stereotypical default orcish kind of features and pushing it around. And I figured as it became something more bestial and dragon-like, it's the muzzle would sort of stick out like a prognathism, like the mouth juts forward, bigger teeth, bigger jaw. And then, as it goes later on, I do add horns, but I put them in a sort of a different spot than people would normally put horns. I can go into that once we get the horns. So, yeah, as you can see, just like it's almost kind of like a Warhammer orc, just big teeth shooting out, and just really not anything that's too distinct from general fantasy stuff. It gets even worse once I start putting in the tone and the shape and the rendering. It just looks like a. It reminds me of, I think it was in Fantasia. There's just like this kind of old stereotypical demon guy shooting out of a mountaintop from like the 40s or 30s. I can't remember when Fantasia came out, but he just looks so standard, like kind of fairy book or fairy tale, like storybook kind of demon. But it was really just kind of placeholder as I worked it out. So once again, the frame, I'm considering skipping the recording of the frame. It might be a good idea. I mean, I could say that it's good to include just to show a lot of the uncool parts of this process. It's not like a big like rock star kind of diva job. This is all just shoveling and measuring and nailing, and it's all just like the grunt work. There's so much grunt work for this sort of stuff too. I mean, I've jokingly said I should just get this outsourced somewhere, but I think getting that set up would be more complicated, and then you'd have to wait, and really it's only 5 minutes. But it does work out. It does help out quite a lot. Especially because I'm sort of a messy worker. So if I had to keep cleaning up that outside edge all the time, that would be a big hassle. And I know that if I don't think I'd even be able to wait till the ends to like go around and clean up the edge and make up for it. So this is a good way to just help keep things moving along. It's an investment of time. Just 5 minutes here, and then that saves me probably over the course of the rest of the piece, probably anywhere between like 25 and 45 minutes would probably save me. Just knowing how sloppy I can be. Maybe. I'm thinking about doing a week where I do the thing all on one layer and I never make any new layers ever. So I'll see about that. That might actually be kind of fun. It'll be frustrating, but I'll do it. That's one thing I like about the stuff that I do for this channel is that I'm trying to use Photoshop as minimally as I can. I just don't want people to be intimidated by it or feel cheated if they don't have like fancy equipment, fancy brushes, fancy hardware, whatever. I'm doing it just with layers and just one single solid brush, just the circle, just like the default Photoshop brush. I'm just trying to keep things as simple and even like what the minimized menus and toolbars and things that I have in Photoshop. I just want it to be as basic as possible. So if I could do one where I do deliberately no layers, I think that might be good. I just want people to just not think that there's some sort of magic to Photoshop. It's all just practice and simple stuff. You don't need anything fancy. It's pretty much how anything goes. Okay, well now that I'm sort of into the rendering stage, I'm going to go over the backstory of Grashnak. So this is going to take a while. This is a lot of writing, but I'm going to go through it. I think it's actually I really enjoy reading people's characters, like backstory that they send me. I think that helps with the videos. Okay, so Grashnak is the youngest of the Marden family tree, the latest son of Darkan and Narden. He grew up surrounded by traders, diplomats, and warriors. He was always fascinated by the comings and goings as a child, and asked lots of questions of everything, never stopping to learn one thing in depth before moving on. Given his accomplished trading family, Grashnak had a lot to live up. Sorry, I'm butchering this. It's just my monitor's far away. I'm just going to zoom in here. Given the accomplished trading family, Grashnak had a lot to live up to. He trained as a warrior, as did everyone of his tribe, but unlike his brothers, Grashnak could not find a profession. Diplomacy didn't suit him, and the trading arena was too demanding for him. He turned to the outdoors as a farmer, and for a while he was successful, but one particularly bad winter wiped out his and many other farms, as well as losing his wife Mara, who died in labor, along with his son. Heartbroken, Grashnak turned to solitary hunting, where his sharp eyesight served him well. However, an encounter with a rival tribe cost him a finger and his hawk Swiftwing. While recovering from his injuries, Grashnak rediscovered books and began an obsessive pursuit of knowledge. This quest, so amusing to the elders and the travelers who visited and traded with the Marden tribe when he was a child, soon became an irritating from a young man for those who had to put up with his many, many flighty questions, and protests flooded into the tribal council. Finally, in AC 999, the Elders' Council ordered Grashnak onto a caravan to the border city of Selenica, just inside Darokin, where he was to join the tribe's trading post. They hoped this would mature the teen, and hopefully he would settle into a profession. Defending themselves along the way from raiders, the caravan made quite a quick run to Darokin, and Grashnak was soon at his new home, when he quickly explored and found the knowledge he craved in multiple libraries, temples, and folk who knew a thing or two. He was soon lost in the city and in the vast storehouses of learning. In the spring, things began to go wrong. His intense curiosity concerning architecture led him into the more seedy side of the city to see the underground workings. While in a dive, he was attacked, drugged, and made to act out the fantasies of a group of seedy city traders, including a murder. After the act, they dumped him outside the city in rags. Getting used this way breached the Marden tribe's honor code. Word reached them before Grashnak, and his attempts to return to the Marden House trading post was rebuffed as dishonored. He was stripped of the house's signature hair braid, given minimal equipment and a handful of gold. He was told by the lead trader, his own brother, Maf, never to return unless he regained his honor. In despair, Grashnak hit the road going to Parsa. Grashnak's knowledge lust flagged, and he looked being no more than a mercenary. He drank heavily, made a fool of himself on several occasions, though he unknowingly gained a reputation as a strong swordsman, guarding many caravans over several years. Eventually, Grashnak regained his curiosity for knowledge after escorting a dwarf scholar on an archaeological dig into an old tomb. Turned out Tiran was a clanless dwarf exile that had fallen into the ways of the thief. Their expedition was successful, and Tiran introduced Grashnak to other adventurers who could share his interest in the acquisition of knowledge and wealth. The hulking half-ogre Harak ap Horak, a cleric of the god of strength and lightning Cord, Hathodar, an elf hunter who dabbled in shape-changing magics, and Somran, an ursine sword mage who mixed magic and weaponry together. The group would bring Grashnak the sense of belonging and he had missed since his exile, and he settled into the life of a warrior adventurer full-time. After many adventures, hair-raising deeds, and near escapes, the party perused a long-standing tale of a dead dragon's hoard. Called Parnexia, the amber dragon was known to lair in the Black Peak Mountains. Some dead ends and side adventures later, the party found Barglan, who their contact said had been to Parnexia's lair and survived. Barglan was an orc swordsman and barkeep who repeatedly warned them against going into the beast lair as it was cursed. He offered himself as proof. He had been born human, he claimed, but his greedy desire for strength and power had led him to becoming an orc and outcast from his people. Of course, the party did not heed such a warning and traveled to the dragon's lair before following directions Turan persuaded from Barglan. After getting through numerous traps, the party found that Parnexia was indeed dead. Her preserved body sat on top of a huge mound of treasures. Gold, precious stones, artifacts, while all around her lair was hung tapestries, banners from long-dead people's portraits. Ignoring the signs that others had come and fallen before them, the party slid up to examine everything and found themselves being drawn to various things. For Grashnak, it was the dragon herself. He found himself staring at the face, drawn to her still open eyes. The others were filling bags of loot while Grashnak removed some of the fleshy part of her left wing and draped it over himself like a cloak. He also took a banded metallic belt from under her chin and some cloth from under a pile where her head was pointing, and then left the chamber. All of the party left with a significant item they would only reluctantly show the others, leading to distrust. They could not be sure the others would not steal their thing. The gold, jewels, etc. was less important to Grashnak than his belt and cloak. In the first night's camp he had tried on the belt, and it fit perfectly, and he spent the nights dreaming of flying as a dragon. By the time they reached Barglan's Valley, the party had split. All of them were showing signs of being changed by their thing. Grashnak was bigger, his cloak melding into his rough skin and his fingers and toenails becoming claws. However, the others did not care, too wrapped up in their own dreams and desires to see what was happening to them. Only Grashnak reached Barglan's inn. Everyone else drifted off in their own directions. Grashnak only reached it drawn by the smell of beer and food. Barglan took him in and looked after him as Grashnak slowly transformed into a half-dragon over 30 agonizing days. His dreams were plagued by calls of dragons and flying. His waking with pain in his wings, tail, and horns burst from his skin. On the 31st day, the pain had ebbed, but Grashnak was no longer a man, but a monster. Grashnak first flew 33 days after encountering Parnexia, throwing himself from Barglan's barn roof, though he could never say why he'd climbed up there. The sense of flight was intoxicating, and Grashnak was hooked. The dragons in his dreams now whispered regarding how to fly and fight in the air, so he took their lessons to heart, mastering flight before the second month was out. Grashnak knew he also had to leave Barglan's Valley before he drew unwanted attention, and he had a calling to the southwest. He left, leaving Barglan his cut of the gold and gems to pay for his care, traveling only with his belt, loincloth made from the purple cloth he had taken, some tools, a pack crafted to sit between his wings, and a few weapons. Traveling southwest, Grashnak had time to learn more of his draconic abilities and reflect on what his curiosity had done to him. Half-orcs were outsiders in society, and now he was a full-on monster, likely to be killed on sight in most places. He was still driven by his dreams, and increasingly he realized he was being guided somewhere. Grashnak discovered he now feared small spaces and slept in the trees rather than a cave or ruin, sometimes flying, sometimes walking, and occasionally being attacked. Oh, what fun when he discovered his breath weapon. Grashnak was drawn to a nameless mountain in the Draocan Five Shires border, and at its peak he found a dragon shrine to the draconic god Opal. This was the place he had been called to, and without realizing it, he started a ritual of worship to the god, letting the voices, spirits of the place guide him. He talked, chanted to Parnexia and to Opal. He dreamt, saw, flew through Opal's dark cave network, through tunnel after tunnel before coming before Opal herself. Opal informed Grashnak he was the carrier of Parnexia's soul. His curse was to be the one who brings her home to the Opal plane after she had been trapped in the mortal world. Of course, he had to undergo some modifications to be worthy to carry a dragon's soul, but he had done so well. Grashnak felt something leave him, and a ghostly Parnexi appeared to him and thanked him before flying into the plane. Opal told him he had passed the first step on becoming a true dragon. And then he gestured him away, wherein Grashnak woke on the ground before the shrine. He was changed, he felt clearer headed, more balanced, and certainly more accepting of what he had become. Grashnak was also not alone. An older amber dragon was waiting and watching him. He introduced himself as Velamarian, and he was to be Grashnak's mentor in the ways of the dragon. Since then, Grashnak has been at Velamarian's side, learning as they travel. He is taken to the life of a dragon cleric. There's still so much to learn. So that's the write-up of Grashnak. Big deal. This guy's a big deal. He's got a lot of stuff going on. So as far as that goes, he's got a rich history. He's been there, he's done it, he's seen it all. But he's transforming into some sort of strange dragon creature. Big write-up. Very good. I like it when people give me like the whole backstory. There's often times if you have a question about like how something should be depicted, or if you're just not sure of what might be a good detail to include, just going in and just reading the story can really help jar things loose. So even if like you're looking at a character and they've just got like you've drawn them up and they're just not popping, like maybe like their boots are just too plain, or like their shirt is just pretty standard fare. Just going through and looking for any sort of details about something that's happened to them in the past, something they've been given or discovered in the past, any sort of clue about personality, or like whether they're shy or outgoing, everything like that can change, can sort of be manifested visually depending on how that character is sort of built up. Kind of how those traits mix together, sort of like spices in a chili. So like sugar is going to be different. It's going to do different things to like pancakes than it would to a hamburger, but it'll still have an effect, and it's still sugar. Maybe that's going to be a good video, something to go into, is just how different character attributes can affect the character's design visibly. It's not a set rule. It's not a set like if they're mad, make them look like this. If they once got cheated out of money in a gambling, in a night of gambling, give them this sort of hat with this sort of point. It's not like that. It's as varied and distinct as real humans are, but there is consistency. There is a language that humans buy into, whether they know it or not, and that can work out well on characters. A lot of it has to do with body language, posture. For the most part, it's kind of that sort of stuff, but it's just how they dress, what they wear, and how they wear it. It's pretty much all there. So yeah, lots of rendering. Big pile of anatomy just hanging out on here. The illustrations of Grashnak that Paul included, he was very muscular and large. He was built like a football player or like a wrestler from WWE. In that case, I'm fine. I'm okay with that, but it still, to me, it even still just seems a little bit too. It was definitely more bodybuildery, really, very particular. And so I thought, how can I have somebody who is still very muscular and very strong, but has a bit more of like a less deliberately developed physique? So, in real life examples would be like I guess farmers or lumberjacks, people that just sort of do like hard physical labor that just get strong just because of it. Some sort of body type more like that. Typically, when it comes to musculature in like a fantasy sort of setting, I call back to a lot of like reference wise, a lot of like turn of the century like bodybuilders from like the 1800s, 1900s. Back when it was mostly, it just seemed like it was just like beef and milk. It wasn't any sort of injections of hormones or steroids or anything like that, or like there's no like powdered like whey, like protein whey powder drinks or anything. It was just like the human body just moving iron and lifting cows, and there's something that just seems denser and blockier, I think, from that sort of body type, and I think that it has a good old timey feel to it. In this case, a lot of my inspiration, I didn't use any reference for this one, but in my mind I've got this mental image of like the bodies in Ben-Hur with Charlton Heston, one of those old epics films. I think it was from I want to say early 60s, maybe in the 60s at some point. It's this really good movie set in like ancient Rome. But they've got all these guys like, you know, they're rowing the slave ship, and they're fighting in the arena and going on adventures and driving chariots and things. And the Charlton Heston type body, it's just got like this big barrel chest, but they're all very like kind of long and tall and thin. Like they're not bulging, bulky guys, but they've got like just like they look sort of like the kind of body that you'd get if you just like when you think of like the 1950s health regimen of like you wake up and you do some calisthenics and then you maybe go for a jog every once in a while, and where it wasn't like going and like lifting weights all the time, but there was still fitness involved. It's just something a bit more natural and passive rather than like a big bulky sort of figure. So if you ever get the chance, watch Ben-Hur, BenHur, and they've got and yeah, like pay attention to the body types of the actors there. They're a really good reference for fantasy sort of stuff, in real life too, or like even sci-fi or whatever. But yeah, it's just sort of a body type you don't see very often. If I was doing something sci-fi, then I would definitely go more like sort of contemporary, like modern day, like ideas of bodybuilding and sculpting, where it's almost cosmetic more than practical, and that's where you'd get more jocular or like bodybuildery kind of augmented stuff. So here's working out the face, still bringing the mouth and lower jaw out more and more. At this point, I figured I do enough characters with their mouths closed, and you know, with such a like he is striking quite a ferocious kind of pose as far as these poses go. So I didn't want his face looking just like grumpy, but something a bit more involved. So I just opened up his face, made his mouth wide. He's got one red eye and one green eye. I don't know why. It didn't come up in the description. Yeah, I think orcs look good with kind of gorilla-ish noses. That or either like weird little like kind of like busted in like Willem Dafoe kind of noses, where they do have a little bit of a, I don't know what you would call like the main sort of front part of a nose that sticks out. Basically what the part that kind of defines a human nose. They can work with something like that. There's two types of noses for orcs and goblins that you absolutely have to avoid, or else I will slander your work forever. And that's the as Peter Jackson would call the witchy poo nose, where it's like the long kind of pointed, like I'm gonna get you kind of nose. And then there's just there's the pushed back pig nose that you see if you look up like the Githyanki in D&D. They always have those. Or Morbius from Spider-Man. It's just the stupidest looking nose. It just makes me so mad. If I ever see a goblin or an orc in something, then it has one of those pushback noses, I just boycott it. I'm not even exaggerating. I just don't even. I'm just. maybe it's just me, but to me that's a sign of bad fantasy. It's a symptom. It's not the cause though. So for the cheekbones, actually, this reminds me of a video that I want to do, and it's the tusk problem and the horn problem. When you have a head as mobile as a human's head, where it's just like where it can flop around, and we got this short, weak little neck, or even like our jaw, like with tusks, and where you're going to put those, because if you ever watch like highlight reels of fights, whether on World Star or YouTube of like UFC clips, and you watch a bunch of like a compilation of knockouts, there's one thing in common that you'll see time and time again, is that it's people getting hit in the jaw. I had this explained to me by one instructor that there's something to do with where the jaw connects there. It's like really close to, I think it was either the ears. I mean, it is close to the ears, or it's either like because it's close to the ears, or there's, I can't remember if it's even like next to like the major blood vessels that deliver blood to the vein, but there's something in there where because of the joint of the jaw, when that gets hit and back to the skull there, it's just kind of where it shuts you down. So if you have big tusks on your lower jaw, that makes you very susceptible. It's a very weak joint, and it makes you very susceptible to being knocked out. And it's okay to have tusks on your lower jaws, but it depends on the size of the tusks, and it depends on how the rest of the body has been compensated for supporting that, whether it's the jaw joint or the thickness of the neck or the shape of the spine, however that's going to go. I'm going to make a video where I go into that in detail. But as far as the horns in this case, I didn't want to just have them sticking out from like the temples or the forehead, and I definitely don't want to have them just sticking out from the hair. The main reason I didn't want to stick them out from the temples and or the forehead is that that'll make them look like a tiefling. And there's something about, like, I understand people liking the look, but to me it drives me crazy when it just looks like they don't have any sideburns or any hair on their temples, and it just kind of, now everybody just has like a mullet or like a mohawk where it's just long on top and it has to go all the way back around the horns. And I thought a good way to compensate for that would just to have them sort of coming out from the cheekbones, from the zygomatic arch there on the side of the head, just built into there. There's going to be some issue a little bit there. Like, it is largely attached to the zygomatic arch, which is kind of like that line that your sunglasses, would be resting over top of. Where as far as like the muscles for where the jaw closes would be able to connect to, or if you have any like that, the muscles on your temple for pulling up the inside of your jawbone, there's going to still need to be some resolution for that. But I see these as more of proto horns, where they're sort of sprouting here, and they're going to like sort of migrate as the face kind of comes down and moves forward. The eyes will sort of, and the brow will move forward and down, and the horns will sort of gather up and sort of move up. In my mind, I was thinking ahead a little bit of like how this is going to wind up. Like, I'm picturing this guy continuing to transition into something sort of dragony. So I thought this was, it was mostly, for the most part, I just didn't want him looking just like a tiefling. And I think having the horns just coming out of the hair, it's sort of like what I've talked about in other videos, where I just don't like seeing like a spike just coming out of something. Like, there needs to be build up to something. It's got to be integrated and implemented more into the surrounding material. And having horns just popping up out of nowhere, it just looks a little bit silly. And in certain cases, I would use it, like if it was like a Japanese demon sort of character. I know that their sort of depiction of that sort of like demons and stuff, they often do have horns that kind of just pop out like weird sort of cartoon characters. And in that case, I would do it. Like, if I was trying to like retain some sort of aesthetic for that. Hold on, I'm just trying to turn my phone to silent mode here. Okay, that's good. So yeah, once I got the figure sort of more or less figured out, later on I do go back in and add some like speculars, like the highlights. At this point, this is just the occlusion and like the a lot of the volumetric shadows where it's just where the light isn't bouncing back into your eye. And later on I do a pass where I go in and put the light that goes in and shines back into your eyeballs. But that was one of the parts that it was my favorite part, and it was the part that I enjoyed doing the most, and I forgot to hit record. But I'll make a note of it when it all snaps into place. It was terrible. That's another one of the benefits of having all the of a sort of a limited palette, but with each color on its own layer, is that you can still change the colors at will at any time. You don't have to worry about making a new layer or anything, and you can just like even just changing the whole undertone of the image itself is just really nice way to use layers. And that's going to be one of the videos I make, is using layers and lower color palettes and stuff. Another good reason to use the occlusion on its own layer, as you can see here, is you can change the color of whatever you want it to be, and it won't change. You won't have to re-render the whole section that you recolor. And once again, the good thing about the frame being on a different level or a different layer, but all to itself, is you can invert it from white as it is to black. When the image is viewed up against black, you can see into the shadows a lot better and make sure that the colors are balanced and working together. You don't lose details and nothing gets lost from the light pollution. So this backpack, this sort of pack, he's got this thing that goes between his wings. This actually wasn't in any of the drawings Paul gave me, so I was left all alone for this one. But I basically just made it a straight up backpack. So it would go up around his shoulders. How did this video pause? Did it pause? Did I lose the video? There we go. Okay. I wonder what that was from. So it's like it's a backpack, and it sort of essentially, it's not connected to the belt or the loincloth or anything, but it goes up and around and just down enough underneath the membrane of the wings. Pretty simple, really. The fact that it wasn't really made on display. There wasn't really much that needed to be sort of depicted of it. I was thinking about putting stuff that sort of went across his chest, but there wasn't any sort of indication of stuff like that in the sketches, and I wanted to try to keep it loyal. Now he does have, he's got a long sword, and he's got a big axe, and he's got a little axe, and so in this case I just had it strapped down to his back, and it's sort of directly perpendicular to his back, sort of like a dorsal fin, like a shark or something, just to fit between the wings and get in the way as little as possible. And it's sort of nested in there with some leather strapping, some sort of little kind of sheath for the axe. And so the sword itself wasn't really mentioned in any sort of part of history, so I use it as just I just figured I would just put in sort of like a nicer looking sword, something that he's gone on lots of adventures, he's gone and raided tombs, and he knows where to find stuff if he needs it. So just something a little bit fancier made, still fairly simple and not ornate or anything, but just a good fancy, or just a good solid, well made sword. So I often lay out a flat color of just solid color, just thinking of its silhouette, and then above that I make a new layer and I set it to be a clipping mask of the layer below it. So the original layer below it, which is the silhouette, that's just going to be the silhouette. And then whatever you do in the clipping mask layer above it changes the color of the layer directly below it, which is the silhouette. And that's how I am going to be coloring stuff. And I'll be explaining that in another video. So that's what's going on in this case. And there are lots of ways to color, and I'm aware of them all, and I still do it this way. And I'll be able to explain that in greater detail very shortly. yeah, with doing sword blades and stuff, you can render them for probably an eternity if you wanted to. I'm more of a fan of painterly strokes and blobby things, and just seeing stuff depicted with as few brush strokes as possible. And it's not that it's faster or easier, and it might be faster, and it might sometimes be easier, but when things get too smooth and polished and rounded and rendered, and to me that it sort of, I don't want to say it cheapens it, because whatever works, but I just don't like it when stuff is really overly rendered. It just doesn't appeal to me, especially if like the whole rest of the piece isn't rendered to that same level of fidelity. Then it's just going to stand out and look really bad. So, I mean, the chrome type nature, like the high sheen metallic nature of a sword, kind of demands of anything on a character. It's going to really be like the metal and the skin. But skin looks better with blobby chunks depicting it or rendering it out. But with metal, it's like if you really did carry metal all the way to what metal should be exactly, it's going to look like it doesn't fit with the rest of the character. So allowing it to be painterly like that, I think, is a valid and good thing. So this design for the belt is somewhat different from the one that Paul had been drawing. His is much more simplified. It's sort of like almost like a chrome high polished cummerbund with about, it looks like 4 or 6, I don't have it with me, but 4 or 6 sort of bands that connect in the middle, just under the belly button. And I thought, a metallic band with some purple sort of drapey cloth hanging down is fine, but I wanted to sort of spike it up a bit, dragging it up a bit. I think his design works a bit better with a character that's physically more imposing and massive. But in this case, I thought if I had something that was that sort of had too clean of a metal and too round of a design, it would just sort of looks a bit silly on him. So I wanted to make a more angular, almost like something that would be like from a priest's outfit, like with like this weird flared out thing. It's kind of more like a relic. And it just helps make him look a little bit more savage. Just a little bit of metal sheen. You don't want too much. I pictured it being like a darker kind of metal. Oh, I can't remember what it's called. Or just sort of like a gunmetal, like a polished gunmetal, you could say. That'd be a fine way to... Tungsten. I think tungsten is the one. It's like they get all those really dark wedding bands made out of tungsten. So it's such a simple character as far as costume goes, and for the like very naked. For the most part, this is all rendering. Most of the time was just spent rendering. Here's just some subtle reflection of the thighs in the metal of the cummerbund or belt. But yeah, lots of rendering. I'm finally starting to get a better grasp on hands, I think, and like drawing them from the bones up. I've been doing a lot of studies on hands and things, and they're weird. But it's one of the, like, sometimes I think it's hopefully like maybe common with a bunch of other artists. But if you ever have this happen, don't be discouraged. But yeah, just like sometimes you feel like you just have a really good command of a certain thing, and then other times for years on end you feel like you can't draw it without looking at a photo. Like you just have to use reference, and it's like you totally lost it. And stuff comes and goes. Like sometimes I feel like that I'm that sort of way all the time. Like there's always something that I'm not good at anymore, or like that I've lost my grasp of. Like usually it's shoulders, or hips, or facial muscles, or hands. Sometimes hands just seem impossible, and they're weird. They're hard to get used to. But yeah, just keep drawing it. That's kind of one thing that happens too, especially with this series, is like in my sketchbook I'll be working and nothing is working, and I've just got pages and pages and pages of just garbage, and then I come and do this stuff, and then somehow I can just draw it even though I was working on it and all week and just being frustrated. Oh yeah, so there we go. So that's where I accidentally I forgot to hit record. I was a big bumbling idiot. So I'm gonna get better at working on that stuff and not doing that. So he's got some long hair. He's growing his hair back. I remember hearing about. I mentioned earlier in his history that he had his hair cut, his braid. I've seen in a few movies set in ancient China or medieval China. I'm not sure exactly when it was, but there's those haircuts where the front half of the head was shaved. It's sort of like the traditional, like the classic depictions of like people from China. But it's like in movies from like old timey stuff where it's like the front half of the head is shaved and then the back half of the head is this really long ponytail going back. And usually in the movies there's a scene where some guy gets his ponytail cut and he like yells and into the air, and it's like the worst thing in the world that ever happened to him. And I've always wondered why it was. I always assumed it was like some sort of dignity or honor sort of thing, or like, you know, that's a mark of his family or something, and you know, like no man is worth his salt without it. But I found out that the reason they even had that haircut through much of China was because that group had been conquered, and they were forced, because of who and what they were, to have that haircut as a sign of loyalty to the emperor or whoever was now in charge. And if they were seen without it, they would be killed. So it was basically a death sentence. So that can be a big deal. So I thought it was fitting that, you know, that's probably not what's happening with Grashnak. You know, this isn't old timey China. But it was cool to have his hair be growing back. You know, maybe he's going to put it back in a ponytail at some point. Who knows? From the sounds of it, it sounds like he's pretty okay with becoming a dragon. But it'd be cool to see if that ever happens. So, Paul, if you're listening, let me know if that ever happens. And maybe I'll draw him as a dragon when he finally turns into one. Who knows? At least a sketch. It'd be cool to see. I really like when people combine hair with dragons, like mammalian traits and features. Like this. So down here at the end here, I'm just adding some more reptilian stuff. He's still reading a bit too gargoyle-y. He's not transitioning enough, so just some scales here and there. It was also nice, part of the description that he gave me in the sort of the point form list is that he's got plenty of body hair. So it's actually kind of fun to go in and put a bunch of like chest hair and arm hair and all that. You don't get to see that very often. Everyone wants their characters to be like smooth shaven. And this is not very realistic. It was also good, fun to just put it up on his arms as well. As, you know, if he's going to be a weird mammal creature, it makes sense that his body would be manifesting it that way until he becomes much more reptilian. And then because it's fantasy and there's bat wings, you got to have the puncture holes through the membrane, which apparently heal quite quickly on bats. They're not a big deal. I'm not sure if they get really bad, then they're a big deal, but. Yeah, holes in wings, really. It just doesn't look right without them. At least not a tattered edge. Now, this is one time when I've been really hesitant to depict things as they really are, is the texture of the membrane of a bat wing. I don't really see bats very often, but I was looking at bat wings, and they've got like a really crinkly, almost like cellular, like squared cellular texture to it. And one day I'll have enough guts to fill out the texture of a bat wing with that texture. But I feel like if I just did it without like really taking the time and putting in the real care, it would just look messy and scribbly and too crappy. So that's one place where I could probably get a bit better at it. So yeah, just lots of rendering and always rendering. At least I get the veins in there. But yeah, without getting that sort of fidelity here, it can get pretty tense. Now I'm down to the last 30 seconds of the recording. So I just wanted to say thank you to Paul for entering and for winning. And thanks for everyone who participates in the free weekly character art lottery. And that's held every Monday. Every week. So if you win, I draw your D&D characters for free. All you got to do is tune in on Sunday and Monday and find out what the hashtag to tweet that week is, and I'll let you in, and the winner gets picked randomly. So thanks a lot for watching, everybody, and I'll catch you next time, and hope it helped.